My name is Jared Krug. I'm a technical specialist with Autodesk in specializing instruction. So I'm going to take you guys through today. I think we have about 45 minutes, basically two of the products in BIM 360, BIM 360 Plan, and then BIM 360 Layout. Based on kind of the questions throughout, we'll try to get through all of this. I'm going to start with BIM 360 Plan first. And again, if you have any questions during this, just go ahead and please unmute your mic. I believe that's the option, and just go ahead and ask away. So go ahead and get started. I have the screen open now, and I basically have a data set that's already pre-populated with a plan. So this is a mythical project that's about a year in length. We're about halfway through this project. So BIM 360 Plan, it's basically its entirety, is most of the products in BIM 360 have a web interface, which is what we're in right now, as well as an iPad. I won't be showing the iPad today just based on time, but we will cover a lot of the same things that you could get access to on the iPad. In short, BIM 360 Plan is our production planning solution in the BIM 360 platform. Obviously, one of the things in construction is being able to finitely understand and to dictate tasks at a kind of at a macro level, at a micro level. So the advantage obviously is doing that is to keep track of tasks as they go through to certain milestones. And what we suggest is basically pulling those milestones from the master schedule environment, such as say a P6 from Oracle. So what we're going to do is get started, and we're going to go into the project administration screen. There's several things here that are very important we want to cover, basically to set up the system so that we can filter on them once we're actually in the plan itself. We do have the bottom here, if we look at this PPC target, so PPC is plan percent complete. It's simple math. It's basically the percentage of what we said we would do, so from a task perspective, to what we actually completed. And in the United States, most general contractors are aiming towards like an 80 to 90% completion rate. So in this case, we've set this percentage at 85%. Now, what that does is basically measure everything in the project against that that percentage, as well as every task. We also get down to measuring each trade and contractor on the project as well, and we'll show what that looks like. So once we set that, we want to leave that beginning of the project, and everything will be measured against it. Moving up, again, very important in construction is to have root cause. Now, root cause is important because when we have incomplete tasks in BIM 360 Plan, we want to define exactly why those are incomplete. And once you see at the very end of this, when I show you the reports, we'll be able to filter and get a cross-project view of these root causes. And that's super important. If you look at a project, maybe it's a 2 to 3 year project, we'll see at the end of that really some enlightening things about some of the dynamics in our project. We'll talk about those. We can certainly use the root causes that we have in the system. You see if I hover, I can cancel out any of those, or maybe I have a root cause, a site-specific one that I want to add and put that in this system. Okay. We can also honor holidays on the project. So, for example, if the actual project itself is honoring static holiday, work holiday, we can do that. And once that's put in the system, then we really can't schedule anything actually on those dates. Basically, the system says we're honoring that, and there'll be nothing actually against it. Kind of moving up here in the scheduling, we have a Monday through Friday. That is a default static work schedule. You can't actually change that. We can, though, at the project level, say Saturday and Sunday. Once we do that again, that basically allows us to add tasks on those specific work days of the week. We can certainly override that. So if we have, let's say, once we're into our plan, we have inspections that are happening on the weekends, we can override this even though we haven't done it here. And again, I'll show you what that looks like once we get into the actual solution. Not to cover these, but we do add companies and members. Once we add companies, then we add members to that. So really, the way the system works is because this is connected to BIM 360 HQ, our administration environment. Once we add these in once, they're basically in the system. So anytime we go and add, let's say for a new project, or really in any of the BIM 360 products in the platform, it's an easy add because it's almost like a VLOOKUP in Excel. When you start typing, it'll kind of populate that field for you. Locations is super important when we talk about kind of filtering and breaking down scopes of work in BIM 360 Plan. So we get to add our own location structure here. Again, just be able to filter those once we get into the solution itself. And then the last one is very similar to location structure. We want to have a work breakdown structure. So we may have, static scopes of work defined by big elements. So you may have, in this case, our excavation. You can see here site utility work, some of our foundation work, structural steel, et cetera, et cetera. And we want to define those as much as possible because we'll be able to filter those once we're actually in the BIM 360 Plan environment. Okay. All right. So let's get into the view here. I'll click out of the administration console. So I'll walk you through basically each one of these views, right? So there's 3 main views, and then there's a reporting module we'll look at. So we'll go through each one of them, highlight some of the really some of the benefits of each of these views, and then go into the report feature. So all of these views have a way to, again, quickly filter based on 1, 3, and 6 week schedule. Now, in the last planner methodology, we do have this notion of 1, 3, and 6 week look-aheads, and really that's all we want to pull out of our master schedule is 6 to 9 weeks. So that's a best practice when we look at the lean process is to pull 9 weeks back and then be able to populate that into BIM 360 Plan. We also have the filters based on company, and again, if you remember back on our administration setup, our location, and then work breakdown structure as well, and we'll get into type and the status here very shortly, okay? But this main view here, this list view, is really nice for a couple things. So let's say that in a vertical construction project, as you well know, we have many floors of a project that are being built out. The scopes of work for each of those floors is very similar, and we may have defined those as their own location, so that we can actually build and confine that scope of work by floor. So this view here is great for doing not only really quick entry into the system, so I can change by clicking in here any one of the tasks, any one of the activities, the type, which we'll get into, the breakdown, so we can float between these really quickly by just quickly entering the information. But let's say that we want to take our first floor activity, we want to push that to, let's say, our second floor. So what we're going to do is, in this view, our 3 week look ahead, actually let's go to our 6 week look ahead so we get more of a defined view. We're going to go to our first floor. We may not have, there we go. So there's our first floor for 6 weeks. And so what we know in this specific first floor is that we have a whole slew of trades that are in this first floor across the 6 weeks. And we know that that scope of work is very consistent to our other floors. So what we can do is build our plan based on known elements for this first floor. And in the list view, what we do is come up here and click this top little button, just like you do in Excel, to highlight a whole row of activities. And you see this group action dialog box comes up. So we're going to say we're going to copy. You can see here I have move and delete as well. I'm going to copy those 24 activities. I can get specific again, the name, company, person, and then location and work breakdown. But as we know, we're going to then populate our second floor with the scope of work. And then we're going to push this, our finish date. And again, lean and last planner methodology basically says we pick our end date and we work backwards from there. So we know that we want to finish this second floor in 30 days from today's date, okay? Now, I won't do this, but once I create those 24 activities, no matter what the current status is for this first floor, it will bring those in and copy them in the respective date duration with the status of open. So I can go ahead and build that, that completion of that second floor based on the current progress of work. Okay, so let's then go to, I think one thing I didn't cover is the different activity types. So we do get to accommodate just straight up incremental adds of activity. So I've got a task is really just the root type of activity we can add. You can see here I can add a milestone. So we, as I stated, we want to be able to bring those milestones back. Normally those are 9 to 6 weeks, and we work backwards from there. So those are actually defined, very consistent CPM look and feel, and a little upside down triangle. Roadblocks, obviously if we have roadblocks that we want to honor in the environment, we can do that. Deliveries as well as inspections. We have those two types of activity that we can actually leverage in the system. And then again, as I said, for statuses, we have really these open, committed, complete, and incomplete statuses. In true fashion, what we do in the last planner methodology is, as I said, every task comes in open. We gain consensus and commitment from the team. Usually those are in a weekly work plan session. Those are typically Monday or Tuesdays. We go around the room, and I've seen this done with superintendent kind of orchestrating this in the trailer with the PE, really doing all the legwork in the environment. And we complete those, if they are complete, that next week, or that we incomplete those. And that's really what happens when we get into selecting that root cause, and I'll show you what that looks like. And then certainly if you want to backlog is a notion of basically parking an item, parking a task until we actually have a known home for that and a time frame. So we can actually get that in the system and then manage it once we get either resources or maybe location opened up, really all those elements combined. Okay, the next view is our swim lane view, and I like to use this view really from a visual perspective. The same, kind of the same aspects we talk about when we think about the schedule. However, you know, in the first view, it's more of being able to interact almost in a spreadsheet. This is more of just the real kind of granular view, so that each stakeholder can look at their scope of work, or the project team can understand who's on a project at any point in time. So I simply come up here. I have 3 static ways of looking at this information, one by location, by company, or by work itself. So I can simply click that, and you can see for the 6-week period, let me take off my, make sure I have my filters off. Show all locations. There we go. Sorry about that. So I had a filter based on the last view and the list view, if you remember that. So now what we basically said is, hey, view by company. I want to see, in this case, for the 6 weeks I have in my view, I want to see all the companies that are on my project. And then I can actually view by work as well. So I want to be able to kind of get a visual idea of the type of work that's being done on the project in the next 6 weeks. I can do that. Any point in time, I can come in and update really any of these if I needed to. Let's say that if I want to change any aspect with a specific task, I can do that. If you notice here, I can actually grab, let's go to one that's open. Here we go. I can go and grab one of these elements and slide it if I need to. So I can move those back and forth. Certainly I could do that in ListView by just typing in information, but again, some people like to work in more of a visual mode to get access to that scope of work. Okay, so that, again, it's a very visual way of looking at the data, a nice kind of informed way to give the team some clarity on what's going on at a specific point in time. Now, the last view is really this Gantt view, and this is my favorite view because it combines kind of both environments. And for all those kind of CPM heads and the schedulers in the audience, this should be a very sigh of relief for you, because it's a very traditional way of looking at the data. And if you see here on the left, we've got that almost list view type that we had in the first view, combined with really the block view that we have in the swim lane view. And so we get kind of a marriage of the two. And again, we have static ways of viewing the data here. We can, again, show our weekends if we wanted to. We can then filter based on really anything we do and we don't want to see, most specifically probably we don't want to see. We can turn off certain headers. I think the best way to use this view is basically to create dependencies on tasks. So the way we do that in this view is, let's say we're going to have a dependency. Let's move this task back. So let's say we have a dependency between this specific tie-in task the completion of this task has a tie to basically the cleaning team needs to come in and kind of clean that area. And if you notice, we've got a day that separates the two. So what this is basically saying is to the teams that once this is completed, this tie-in task, then we have a day before we can actually get in either to the workspace and get access for final cleaning. But we want to draw a connection between those two. So if you notice, when I hover over, there's a little white ball that shows up, and all I do to basically draw a connection to those two is just stretch that ball, and you notice the task that I'm hovering over here turns green. And so now what I've done is basically create a connection. We're going to show handoff connection, and it will update here in a second. We basically created a handoff between those two tasks. Now, the difference between that dynamic and a true CPM environment, when we have a hard data connection, is that in BIM 360 Plan, it's a soft data connection, and it's by purpose, it's by intent. And the real kind of a nut of this is that at the end of the day, we don't want, in this case, in our production plan, we don't want a machine telling us that we can or cannot get in to do that scope of work. So let's say, for example, the end of this task, let's say that it actually finishes a day early, right? So what happens, the system in a normal CPM environment would respect that day, right? So what if, in reality, this task could actually jump soon after, like immediately after, so we wouldn't lose a day or two in that process. And what that relies upon is the teams to get into the trailer and have a discussion about it, right? So we know that, hey, you know what, we don't need an extra day or even 2 days to complete that task, to get into that scope of work. We can actually go in and get in and start and doing that scope of work. So it really, what this does is put a lot of that kind of interaction on the hard data logic. It puts it to the team members to work out so they can get access to that site. And at the end of the day, we're trying to eat time out of our schedule. I think we all can realize that that's the value that we have with getting into a defined production plan. Okay, let's go into the report area here a bit, and really this is where a lot of the information comes to a head, right? And actually, before I do that, I want to go up, and I'm going to show what an incomplete task looks like. And I'm going to go, sorry, my Gantt view. And so you've noticed I've got my committed scopes of work here. I've got a complete scope that's already been acknowledged. It shows my current date in yellow, the current actual week, and I've got my 6-week look ahead. Let's say for whatever reason that this committed task, because it is due today, unfortunately, we did not get this done. We met in the trailer, we looked at each other, and we said, hey, was this done? Whoever this AFP for our frame and exterior sheathing was incomplete in their task. So we're going to actually hit incomplete. If you notice, as I said before, we're forced to select one of those key root causes. So let's say that our labor was not available, and we're going to save that. Now, true practice says that we need to go reschedule that scope of work, but the system does basically collect that incomplete task. And we can start to leverage that, the metrics, and understand, you know, maybe we have a core of trades on the project that just aren't performing as best they could. Maybe there's some site access issues that are starting to rear their head. Maybe the seasonality with weather is playing a role here, and a lot of those are really intangible once we get into a project and we can't, you know, kind of take a step back. But the system manages this for us and gives that clarity once we start looking into the report module. So once it's incomplete, we kind of leave it alone, and we reschedule that scope of work with the team to go ahead and get that back into our production plan. So let's click on the reports section here. And we have a couple static reports. And if you're familiar, I'm not sure if this group has seen BIM 360 Field. For those that are familiar with BIM 360 Field, if you remember the reporting module in BIM 360 Field, we do have to manually run those reports. In other words, we have to instantiate those either as run them on a schedule, or once we're in the system, we can actually manually tell them to run. BIM 360 Plan is a bit different. It actually takes this information across the project and compiles it and rationalizes it in real time. So any update either from an iPad that's sunk against the service or from users in the web environment, all those updates are taken in and immediately shown in this actual report here. You can see just a kind of a core activity volume, and it shows the prior week, the last week, the current week, right? And then a 6-week kind of rolling average here. And we can click into this report, and it's a great way to get a visual kind of understanding of what's going on, again, from just a pure activity perspective. Now, again, this is across the entire project. What I can do is come in here and do it specifically for one of our companies. Let's go in. I think this is our earthworks contractor. We'll see if... So yeah, so a classic scenario here. You can see that they're off the project. They're earthworks contractor. A lot of activity. Early on in the project, but they're off our project now. And we get, again, kind of balance across the entire trade core. We get to see those activities. We could even do it by location, right? We could even do by our work breakdown structure that we defined earlier. Let's say we want to just do it by floor. And we can really start to put together an understanding of, some dynamics, what's happened or happening on our project, just in visual form here. Now, I didn't show this when I was in the other views, but there is a little printer icon that's consistent across all the views. If I click on that, you can see that I have a couple options. Number one, I could kill a tree and print this on paper, but I could save it as a PDF. And really, I think this is one of the values of this report functionality, is to be able to share this as a PDF across the team, so that we could get exposure into what's going on for those that may not have access to Plan. All right, so let's go back to the report screen, and we're going to go into the PPC snapshot. Now, I mentioned this earlier. We're gathering PPC in the 85%, and we'll get more detail into it. But if you've noticed this little 79% PPC number, I can't edit this. It's basically just a pure output from the system. It's always really interrogating the information and showing that information here for all users across the project. So that 79% will go up and down depending on the activity levels and completions of activities. And unfortunately, as we said earlier, that incomplete status does go against your PPC score. But again, as I said, the PPC snapshot not only is for the project, but it's also for the actual companies. Sorry, we'll go take all our filters off. Show all work breakdowns. Let me just run this. There we go. So now we have not only for each of the for the project, we actually have for the actual contractor. So you can see here, Anderson Construction. We can see that they have 3 incomplete activities, 25% PPC. Again, the idea here is that you may have a lot of activities that are in the pipeline that have yet to be completed. So you have to take a look at this information with a little bit of a grain of salt and understanding, are they still on the project with a lot of incomplete activities just because they're in process? Okay, that's just kind of a best practice, but you can either click into one of these and see the actual incompletes, right? We can even come in here and let's do by location. So I can, let's say, for example, my first floor, I could see again, and we have any data there, but I can either go through, like I said before, each of the dynamics across my work breakdown or location structures. All right, let's go back to my favorite report, is the root cause report. And I've kind of hit this home a little bit, but the importance of being able to understand at a very granular level across, the length of a project, what is working and what is not. And really this is where our root cause kind of comes into play. If I'm able to, this labor not available, if I click into that, I can start to see my known offenders. Again, as I said, this could be a way that, from a pursuit perspective, you're assembling a core of folks to go after a new project. You may not want to have, ACO here or even this AFP because of their high percentage of incomplete work. And you can see that labor is not available is unfortunately is a bad thing with being able to bring to bear execution of work. RFI not answered. I know that never happens in construction, but we could keep track of that as one of our root causes for really work not getting completed. And then work area not available. I mentioned, there could be some very specific site access issues, whether it be endemic to the location or maybe it's based on weather. So certain things here can rear their head. In this case, sometimes not so good. And we can, again, always print those out to be shared across the project team as a PDF. All right, let's go into our PPC Weekly Score. Now, again, I think I talked about this again, but I just want to level set again on what this shows us is our target PPC 85%. This is kind of the range that we're shooting for, right? And then here's our trend, and what that basically is doing is averaging out the various scores by week and averaging them out based on that target 85% PPC. I want to stress again, this needs to have an eye to it. And what will happen is if you get long durations of 30 days or 40 days more of scopes of work, it'll kind of tweak the view of this. You'll have basically a ton of things that are in process but nothing completed. So the best practice to use the system and also to separate your scopes of work is to define those into, instead of a 40-day chunk of work, maybe it's 4 10 days, so that you'll start to get some clarity and intercede if you need to based on any known factors that you pull out of the system. But this score will look a lot different. You won't have these kind of lulls here really of 0%. In fact, that it could be actual work that's just still in process that hasn't been completed. So we have all the filter ranges up here, as I said before, for really every screen that we've shown. Okay. One of the things I want to show before I finish up here, there's ways to get information into the system, and then also the types of users. So really have 3 types of users in BIM 360 Plan. The first one is like myself. I'm an admin, so basically I can create tasks for obviously my company as well as any other company that's on the project. I can also edit tasks that have been assigned to those beyond myself, right? So kind of the administrative user. The next level down is the team user. So team users are if, as a general contractor, if you're that role, you want to give your trades access to BIM 360 Plan so they can leverage their own scopes of work and also create their own scopes of work. Now, they can see the entire plan, but they cannot edit really anything except their own activities. So they can create their own activities and edit those activities kind of autonomously within the bigger scope of the project. And then the last user is really the viewer. We call them the owner view. They see everything in the system, but they can't really edit anything. So this is great for those that maybe have an owner that really wants purview into the production plan, but you don't want them to be able to edit anything at all. And so that's the owner view. All right. So I want to show one last thing before we go on to BIM 360 layout. So there's a couple ways, as I mentioned, to get information into BIM 360 Plan. One is to create those activities one by one, and that can be obviously a bit manual process. There also is the option to bring in and start your plan and then build it based on leveraging floor-to-floor scopes of work, and then being able to copy those as you saw. So that's another way to build your plan. And the other way is to import directly from CSV or from an export from a master schedule solution. So the recommendation here is if you're using P6, SureTrack, or maybe even Microsoft Project, is to grab some meaningful milestone in the future, 9 weeks out, and then bring that, get that out of your CPM environment and into the Excel spreadsheet that we've got. And I'll show you, my apologies, let me just flip screens here. I've got that Excel data sheet, data set right here. We do provide a standard template that you can download. I've messed with this a little bit, but it looks very much like this, right? We have static headers, static headers that have to be part of the import. The one here, the activity name must be present at all times. But then you can go ahead and build out this when you let's say you're exporting, you can then cut and paste that information in here to build out this plan. I did this myself, and it took me about 30 to 45 minutes to actually build out the scope of work, just cutting and pasting from an example of a CPM schedule. So all this, this work can then be brought into BIM 360 Plan. So if we go back into Plan, all I do here is simply select that file. I won't do this, but I can then hit import. And once I hit import, assuming that we have all of the members, the companies, the work breakdowns, the location structures already predefined in the system, it will then marry the information in that spreadsheet and bring it into the environment. So really being able to start not just from scratch, but from kind of a progressional level once you have that export out of the environment here. Okay, so I think we're 40 minutes past. Any questions so far? I'm happy to entertain questions before I go on to BIM 360 layout.
There aren't any questions in the queue at the moment. Guys, if you have any questions, please put them in the question queue, and Jared can get to them as time allows.
Awesome. All right, let me kind of go to the next piece here, and again, I apologize for throwing a lot at you. I'm going to shift now from BIM 360 Plan and a production plan environment to another execution aspect on construction, and layout obviously is a huge part of being able to take let's say, for example, shop drawings and turn those into executable location-based parameters that we would give our field teams to define a whole host of things. Could be for MEP contractors, it could be staking out those hangar locations. It could be maybe from a contractor perspective, verifying the center of anchor bolts, edge of slab, really a whole host of activities, and maybe from self-perform for have to do with concrete. But those exact dimensions traditionally are defined, obviously from CSV environments that are then transitioned to a data controller. BIM 360 layout takes a different tact on that. Obviously, with our heritage at Autodesk, we have a lot of information that's bound inside hopefully a constructible model that comes out of a coordinated environment. And we can then push that, adding points to those intersections, XYZ coordinates. We can define that in our design solutions. In this case, I'm going to be showing what it looks like in Navisworks. And then we're going to push that to BIM 360 Glue, where I can create point sets. And those point sets are valuable, and we can consider those as basically work packs. So as our foreman are assigning scopes of work for the layout crews, we can take a very visual way of assigning those points to our field teams to go lay out, and we don't have the worrisome bother of carving out CSV files or getting a USB drive that has to be transitioned from the field foreman to the layout crews on a daily basis. And we entirely do away with that. And then the last piece is really once we're in the field with those layout points, I'll show you what that looks like on the laptop or the iPad in BIM 360 layout on the app. So there'll be a couple of topics we'll talk about connecting to specific pieces of hardware that we've integrated with, and we'll get into that detail. So, but first let's start in Navisworks. So again, we're going to assume in this process that we have a federated environment. So we've agreed upon as a project team that we've got some notion of completion in that model, of those models, and that we've merged those together or either as a specific scope of work for either verifying existing points that have been located, or we're actually going out and staking those on our own. The connection between Navisworks and BIM 360 Glue is a fairly clean one. I already have it coming up here, but for those that aren't familiar, Navisworks since 2014 has had a connection to BIM 360 Glue. And BIM 360 Glue, again, I'm not familiar with how much you've seen as far as the series of the other BIM 360 products, but our cloud collaboration platform for really bringing that clash and that coordination environment into the cloud. We're simply connecting to that database here through Navisworks by logging into our account and then selecting the project properties. In this case, I've got this demo layout project. I can choose my models, which I've already done. It's going to reopen those. And now I'm in Navisworks, basically opening up a view of that glue model. Let me just get here. And I have all that information as I would inside of Navisworks normally. I'm assuming most are familiar with Navisworks as a way to get access to information for coordination purposes. We're going to use it today to add layout points, and again, as I mentioned, push that to BIM 360 Glue. All right, so in this case, we're going to show, excuse me, there we go. We're going to show our hangar layout. So very simply here, we're going to select, let's say, select all of our hangars. In this case, hide unselected. So that's going to give us just all of our hangars here. And then we're going to go to our tools and add-ins. And this is another element to this whole process in Autodesk Point layout. This is a plugin specifically used here in Navisworks. We also have this for AutoCAD and for Revit as well. It's a plugin that you can install. If you are a subscription and an admin with the BIM 360 Glue, I think it's 5 or more seats, you actually have access to Autodesk Point layout as well as Navisworks. So we're going to open our BIM 360, Autodesk Point layout. Let me just, there we go. I have to authenticate against the environment. And so we've already got some of these that have already been selected, but let's go ahead and add some points here. So we're going to say mark selections. Okay, so we have a couple options. We can do geometry, top center, and bottom center. So let's do geometry in this case. And because these are technically they're cylindrical objects, we are going to select the rods, and we're going to call these are our duct, and we can start adding prefixes here. Very important when you're a layout crew who's defining, let's say, specific points for layout crews that are scheduled on the site at one point in time. You may want to have a prefix for a specific point type so that those the actual labor crews know exactly what points they'll be using. And then a start number. So in this case, we can define a start number. Again, if we're carving out a lot of points in a specific one model, we can have different start numbers for different point types. And this will be a verification rule because we're going to be the GC that actually be verifying these. If there's any point systems that are part of that you've defined as a company that you could use, you would put that there. And the point description option, so you may want to have a very specific point description, but you can just go ahead and leave that for now. We'll go ahead and click through and set OK. And you can see now that we've defined, in this specific case, we've got a couple we've missed because of my hide, but you can see that we have these red balls indicate basically are points that have been attached to the CSV, the XYZ coordinates on top of those hanger points. So all we do now is really just save this, and it's a simple Control-S. And I'm going to call this layout test. It's going to be in our merge file. And I simply hit save. So So now we basically have saved this information back to the cloud in BIM 360 Glue. We've done our job. We've opened that model. We've saved our points into that environment. So we simply go now to BIM 360 Glue. Now, a couple of things here I want to note. BIM 360 Glue, that again is, I don't know how many are familiar with the BIM 360 Glue environment. There are a couple ways to access Glue. One is through the cloud, simply through a browser, which is where we are now. One is through this thin client exe, which you would install on your Windows machine. And the other one is through the iPad. For the use of BIM 360 layout, we have to use the web client. We cannot use the thinclient.exe that you install on Windows. It has to be this this web environment. So you can see here that if you look at this layout test, right? So I just uploaded that, and now we have access to that model. And once I open that model in the cloud, in BIM 360 Glue, you can see this little crosshair shows up. Now that will only show up if I have points that have been added to this specific model. So I click on that. Now, again, we're playing the role of our, let's say, our layout foreman, and we are deciding and assigning work packages for our field crews to go lay out. So we can split those up in any number of ways based on the filters that we created in Navisworks with Autodesk Point Layout. So in this case, we're going to here, and I have a choice. I can go 1 through 8004, basically all the points. I can see that there are points here because it's basically acknowledging that I've got 8004, which is 8004. There's probably some other points that have been in this model that we're not going to bring in. I can choose a description if I wanted to basically get down to a finite description. Again, a role. Maybe I've defined, in this case, as you saw, verify, right? But maybe I also want to bring in control and stakeout. And then the type, right? So as we said, those were duct points, if you remember, and status. And we'll talk about status in a little bit. We're just going to leave that as all right now. And I was afraid of that. Let me just come in and add those to all. I don't think I actually added. So there we've got 137 points that have been found. And the reason I don't think I actually saved those with the actual roles and statuses, my apologies. You can see we actually have these points, and it grabbed some of the other building control points as well. We're going to go ahead and just save this just for essence of time. So those are now part of, and can be part of one of these assigned work packs or filters. So we're going to call this layout test. We can add description, first floor, layout. Okay. We can add that point set. I've been having problems, sorry folks, with my browser. But that point set gets created. And what happens then, this is an example of that point set that gets created. It can be assigned then to our field crews. In this case, I would click on that, and I can say, hey, I want to assign it to this, and I'm going to say, please stake out and verify. When I hit this, basically that point set goes out as an email. Now, email can be opened up in any browser or any client, email client, but if that user happens to be on their iPad and they click on that email that gets sent, if they have BIM 360 layout installed, it will automatically open up BIM 360 layout. It'll download the model, and it will load that point set that has been assigned to that individual automatically. Okay? So now we're going to transition to the actual iPad itself. So I've already kind of opened this up just for sake of time, but if you see here, this is that same model that we talked about. And again, if I had opened this up from an email client, it would have just automatically downloaded this and gone immediately to this screen right here with all those points that we had basically seen on the web environment in BIM 360 Glue. Now, we're not going to go through it, and I'm not connected to an instrument. It makes demoing this a little bit harder, but we would go through number one, setting up, basically building our control and aligning the robots to that control. The iPad really, in this case, acts as our data controller, right? For those that are familiar with either Topcon, Trimble, Sokia instruments or Leica instruments, the traditional data controller connects to that that device. iPad's doing the same thing, right? We have ways to connect the iPad to the instrument via Wi-Fi or Bluetooth. That's your choice. We recommend Bluetooth. It has, in most cases, a better range and a better attachment to that signal. And we do, I guess, just real quick to talk about the instruments we support. So Topcon right now, we support several other instruments. If you're familiar with the DS series, we connect to the DS series of instruments. The LN100 is really the, we call the headless instrument. It's a lower price point instrument. It is a great instrument for if you're a general contractor just doing verifications for MVP trades. It's a great instrument for that. The DS, it has a backsite, so if you're also doing control, bringing control into the building, you can leverage that instrument to kind of do double duty. We also then connect to the Leica Icon series. Again, fantastic instruments, both of them, and unfortunately we do not connect to Trimble. That's a question that does come up. We don't connect to Trimble at this point, but I will let you know that the APL points that plug-in that sits inside of Navis, Revit, or AutoCAD, I can actually push those CSV points to the .MEP or .TFL. Those are Trimble native point sets. Now, unfortunately, I can't connect it to the glue process and view it on an iPad as I'm here, but I could create those points from Autodesk design environments and then push them to a traditional Trimble data controller, whether it be for mechanical or structural trades. Okay. Once I'm in the iPad, again, you can see those are the hanger points that I created in Glue that are brought down into my iPad. If I click on those, I get immediately taken to that specific location. And once I do that, I'm not connected, so it's going to be hard to do, but I could actually stake that specific point if I was connected, right? Other nice things about this is I can actually go straight to a plan view 2D, and the nice thing about being able to leverage this environment is for visual verification, sometimes it's nice to go to 3D. Those are that used to 2D environment. I totally understand. Again, we give this to you in this form. The way that this works is if I had gone through a setup and got everything aligned to my control, I would see the instrument and the prism actually in the model, and I would then walk with my iPad and my prism and be directed to the next point in my list, right? The way it works is once I get over a specific point for stakeout, I would hear, and also visual cues based on that location getting close to my, hopefully my sub-millimeter proximity to that specific point. And you're probably asking, well, how do I actually get to those points that are under deck on the ceiling? We do have a way to do a guided prismless option as well. So there's a routine that's in BIM 360 layout to actually help with that. Unfortunately, again, I can't really show that too well, but I'm not connected to the instrument, but it allows you to use the guide light and the laser to hit that specific point in the model with the instrument for stakeout. I will want to show you a couple things in the settings just to make sure that we understand a little bit about what we can do here. All the units, the display options, the instrument itself can be gathered here. We do have a way to the algorithm algorithms inside the app to accommodate deflection for heat, other variances. If you're in lower climes such as Arizona or Florida, you may know that those dynamics can happen on lower climes in the United States. We also have the tolerance here. We can set our own specific tolerances, for basically for layout. We have a lot of visual things that we can change here as well. But again, it's a full-fledged data controller that allows you to interface with the instruments that I've recommended. Let's go into, I think, one of the things too. Let's say we've done our stakeout against the specific point set. We can gather deviation reports. Those deviation reports, there's nothing here, but once I open this, they're automatically copied to the iPad, and I can push that into an email, right? Once that's an email, I can share that with the layout foreman so we can understand a little bit about what's going on with our deviations that are out of tolerance, and go from there based on some action against resetting those points. I've kind of gone through this fairly quickly. I know we've covered a lot. I have about 5 minutes. I want to save time for any questions, folks. I know that, again, I've covered a lot here. Is there any questions?
Not as of yet. If you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the question queue. I guess I have a quick question for you, Jared.
Sure.
What is your favorite feature about either plan or layout?
So my favorite feature in Plan, I think it was pretty obvious. I love the reporting capabilities that Plan generates. Again, being armed about what actually is happening on the project at any point in time to make course correction is a super nice feature. But also, once the project's done and we're kind of to reassess what happened, it's really hard to ignore information that's been generated through the interaction of that service. Things like, as I said, incomplete scopes of work, maybe site access issues that rear their head. That's hugely valuable for trying to reassess and then programmatically kind of change course for the next project. As far as layout, I love layout in general. I think, really being able to show a visual view of what has traditionally been a very 2D exercise is really kind of a game changer when you look at how we're being able to leverage for projects that are leveraging a model all the way through really accessing the information on the site. To me, that's a massive game changer, being able to have that visual clarity when you're actually doing scopes of work like this. But again, also, as I mentioned, being able to jump right back into 2D and have a very familiar home with that as you may have already currently.
Very nice. We do have one question that came in. Is Plan and Layout, is it a subscription, or is it a part of the BIM 360? They've already have BIM 360.
Depending on, you may have let's say if you're an enterprise customer of ours, you may already have access to all the BIM 360 products in the platform. They are individual subscriptions, each into their own. So BIM 360 Plan would be distinct and separate from BIM 360 Layout. BIM 360 Layout comes by virtue of the subscription with BIM 360 Glue. So as I think I said earlier, required to have minimum seats for BIM 360 Glue, which you also get as an admin access to Navisworks Manage, the BIM 360 connected version, as well as Autodesk Point Layout, which is the plugin, and you can choose whether to use that for Navis like I did, or Revit or AutoCAD.